My ex-mother-in-law collapsed at my billionaire ex-husband's ceremony, and the granddaughter she erased saved her, then walked away. I stood in that sterile hospital room, looking down at the woman who'd spent 23 years pretending my daughter didn't exist. Helena Hawthorne's voice was barely a whisper, her aristocratic armor completely stripped away. Marielle, please. I was wrong. About you. About everything. Let me make it right. I want to fund a fellowship in Ilara's name. A national trauma surgery program. I felt the weight of 2 decades of silence pressing against my chest. This was the woman who'd called me unsuitable for her son. Who'd erased my child from the family tree like an embarrassing stain. And now she lay there, humbled by the fact that the granddaughter she'd dismissed had just saved her life. I looked at her steadily, my voice calm and clear. I didn't raise her for you, Helena. I raised her for herself. Her eyes filled with tears. I know, she whispered. I know that now. Then ask Ilara, I said quietly. She makes her own decisions. She always has. Have you ever watched someone who erased you suddenly need you to survive? Have you ever had to choose between the satisfaction of saying I told you so and the dignity of just walking away? This is a story about a woman who built an empire from nothing, a daughter who became extraordinary despite being denied, and a moment when the past came crawling back, only to discover that some doors closed permanently. And that's exactly how it should be. Welcome to Mr. Stephen Stories. If you believe in the power of choosing yourself, of building a life on your own terms, hit that subscribe button right now. Help this channel grow by sharing stories that matter, stories about real strength and unshakable dignity. Because what you're about to hear will change how you think about second chances forever. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. Thick cream paper, embossed with gold lettering that caught the light streaming through my studio window. The Hawthorne Legacy Gala. I held it between my fingers, feeling the weight of expensive card stock and even more expensive expectations. I stood at my workstation, surrounded by half-restored paintings and the smell of turpentine and linseed oil. My studio was small but mine. Every brush, every canvas, every restoration project bore my name. Marielle Cruz. Not Marielle Hawthorne. Never that. The world of Hawthorne dynamics, of tech empires and philanthropic galas held in crystal ballrooms, that world had stopped being mine 23 years ago. I'd walked away from it quietly, without fanfare, without lawyers demanding what I was owed. I'd left with my daughter growing inside me and my dignity intact, and I'd built something else entirely. Something that didn't require his last name or his mother's approval. It had taken years to establish myself in the art restoration world. Years of proving my worth, of building a reputation based solely on skill and dedication. The first few years had been brutal. Working out of a tiny apartment, taking any job I could find, restoring cheap reproductions while pregnant, then with a newborn sleeping in a basket beside my workstation. But I'd persevered. I'd made a name for myself, one careful restoration at a time. Now, museums consulted me. Private collectors sought my expertise. I'd restored pieces for the Metropolitan Museum, for private galleries in Paris, for collectors who trusted only my hands with their precious acquisitions. I'd done it all without a single connection from the Hawthorne name, without a single favor from that world I'd left behind. I was about to toss the invitation into the recycling bin when my phone rang. Ilara. Mom, did you get it? I looked down at the gold lettering. The invitation? Yes. Are you coming? I hesitated. My daughter's voice carried no pressure, no manipulation. She'd never been that kind of person. Direct, honest, clear. I'd raised her that way. Ilara, you know that's not my world anymore. I know, she said simply. But it's mine. At least for one night. I'm receiving an award for the trauma surgery program. It would mean something if you were there. I closed my eyes. 23 years of birthday parties without grandparents. School events where other children had extended families and mine had only me. Graduations where the Hawthorne name was conspicuously absent. And through it all, Alara had never complained, never asked why her father's family pretended she didn't exist. She'd been 7 when she first asked about her father. We'd been at the park, watching other families, and she'd turned to me with those serious dark eyes. "Mom, why doesn't my dad want to know me?" I'd knelt down, looked her straight in the eye, and told her the truth in words a 7-year-old could understand. Sometimes people make choices based on fear instead of love. Your father chose to keep his family happy instead of fighting for us. That was his choice, and it says nothing about your worth. She'd nodded slowly, processing. Do you think he'll ever change his mind? I don't know, baby. But what I do know is that you are loved completely and absolutely by me. And that's enough. She'd hugged me tight. You're right, Mom. It is enough. And somehow, it had been. We'd built a life together, just the two of us. A life filled with art and science, with late-night study sessions and early morning walks, with conversations about everything from quantum physics to the restoration techniques of Renaissance masters. She'd grown up in my studio, doing homework surrounded by centuries-old paintings, learning that beauty and precision could coexist, that patience and skill could restore what time had damaged. I'll be there, I said now, pulling myself back to the present. Thank you, Mom. After we hung up, I stood there for a long moment, looking at the invitation. Then I walked to my closet and began planning what I would wear. Not for Victor. Not for his mother. For my daughter. For the woman I'd raised to stand tall in any room, regardless of who tried to diminish her. 3 days later, I stood in the grand foyer of the Arden Royale Hotel, wearing a dress I'd designed myself. Simple, elegant, expensive in ways that had nothing to do with labels. Midnight blue silk that moved like water, cut to perfection. I'd worked with a seamstress in my neighborhood, a woman who understood that true elegance came from fit and fabric, not from designer tags. Around me swirled a galaxy of wealth and influence. Men in tuxedos worth more than most people's cars. Women dripping in jewelry that required insurance riders. The chandeliers overhead threw cascades of light across marble floors so polished you could see your reflection. Servers moved through the crowd with champagne on silver trays. Everything gleamed with the particular shine of old money and new power combined. I didn't belong here anymore. And that realization didn't sting the way it might have once. It settled over me like a fact, neutral and complete. This world, with its careful hierarchies and unspoken rules, with its focus on lineage and legacy, had never truly been mine anyway. I'd been an interloper, a beautiful distraction that Victor had fallen for during a rebellious phase. His mother had made that abundantly clear during our final conversation, 23 years ago. You're a lovely girl, Marielle, Helena had said, her voice dripping with condescension. But you're not Hawthorne material. You don't have the breeding, the connections, the understanding of what it means to be part of a family like ours. Victor will tire of this infatuation, and you'll be left with nothing. Best to end it now, before things become even more complicated. I'd been 8 weeks pregnant at the time. I'd left that meeting without telling her, without giving her the satisfaction of knowing she'd already won. I'd told Victor instead, watched his face cycle through joy, terror, and finally resignation. He'd asked me to wait, to give him time to bring his mother around, to find a way to make it work. I'd waited 3 months. 3 months of him making excuses, of postponed conversations, of him choosing his mother's approval over our future. Finally, I'd realized the truth. He wasn't going to fight for us. He was going to choose the path of least resistance, the path that kept his inheritance intact and his mother happy. So I'd chosen for both of us. I'd left. Marielle. His voice hadn't changed. Still smooth, still controlled, still carrying that particular timbre that once made my heart race. I turned slowly, giving myself time to armor up, to remember who I had become in the years since I'd last heard him say my name like that. If this story is touching something deep in you, please take a second to subscribe. Most people listening right now aren't subscribed, and it's the only way YouTube knows to bring you more stories like this. You're not just watching, you're part of this channel. Victor Hawthorne stood 3 feet away, looking exactly like a man who'd spent 2 decades building an empire and trying to forget what it cost him. Silver touched his temples now. Lines marked the corners of his eyes, lines that hadn't been there when we were young and stupid and in love. He'd aged well, the way wealthy men often did, with expensive haircuts and personal trainers and dermatologists who kept time at bay. But there was something hollow in his eyes. Something that all the success and accolades couldn't quite fill. Victor. I kept my voice pleasant, distant. The voice I used with clients, with strangers, with people who existed on the periphery of my carefully constructed life. He opened his mouth, closed it. For a man who commanded boardrooms and controlled billions, he looked utterly lost. You look beautiful, he finally managed. Thank you. The silence stretched between us, heavy with everything we'd never said, everything that had broken and never been repaired. I could see him struggling, trying to find words that might bridge 23 years of absence and regret. Marielle, I'm glad you came. I wanted to. I've been meaning to reach out, to. Marielle. Ilara's voice cut through the moment like a scalpel, precise and clean. My daughter materialized at my elbow, stunning in deep emerald, her father's eyes and my stubborn chin. They're about to start. We should find our seats. She linked her arm through mine, a gesture of solidarity that said everything about where her loyalties lay. Victor watched us walk away, and I didn't look back. I'd spent enough years looking back. As we made our way through the crowd, Ilara leaned close. You okay? Always, I said, squeezing her arm. He looks like he wants to apologize. He's 23 years too late for that. Ilara smiled slightly. Good. Just checking. We found our seats near the front. The ballroom was magnificent. Crystal chandeliers throwing prismatic light across marble floors. Tables dressed in white silk with centerpieces of white roses and orchids that probably cost more than my monthly studio rent. An orchestra tuning in the corner, the musicians in formal attire, preparing to provide ambience for the evening's celebration. Everything orchestrated to perfection, to display the Hawthorne commitment to excellence and legacy. I wondered if anyone here knew the real cost of that legacy. The people erased to maintain it. The choices made in boardrooms that destroyed families. The grandchildren denied because they didn't fit the proper image. Around us, guests settled into their seats. I recognized some faces from the old days. Society wives who'd once included me tentatively in their circles, then dropped me the moment I was no longer attached to Victor. Business partners who'd smiled at me across dinner tables, then acted as if I'd never existed. None of them acknowledged me now. To them, I was a ghost, a footnote in Victor's history, someone who'd been erased as completely as Helena had tried to erase Ilara. But I wasn't erased. I was sitting here, successful and whole, with my brilliant daughter beside me. And that was a kind of victory they couldn't comprehend. The lights dimmed. The ceremony began. Helena Hawthorne took the stage with the regal bearing of someone who'd never questioned her place in the world. At 72, she was still formidable. Perfectly coiffed silver hair styled in an elegant chignon. A gown that probably cost more than my first year's studio rent, a shimmering champagne color that caught the light with every movement. Diamonds at her throat that caught the light like ice, a family heirloom piece I recognized from photographs, worth more than some people's houses. Good evening, her voice rang out, cultured and cold. Tonight, we gather to celebrate the Hawthorne Foundation's commitment to advancing medical science and supporting the next generation of healthcare innovators. I felt Alara stiffen slightly beside me. We both knew what was coming. Or rather, what wasn't coming. Helena continued, listing accomplishments, partnerships, funding initiatives. She spoke of legacy, of excellence, of the Hawthorne dedication to making a difference. She thanked board members, celebrated donors, acknowledged partnerships with prestigious institutions. She didn't mention that her granddaughter, brilliant and accomplished, saving lives daily, had been raised in a modest apartment above an art studio. That Alara's medical school had been paid for with scholarships and my careful saving, not Hawthorne money. That for 23 years, Helena had pretended her son's child simply didn't exist, had refused every attempt at contact, had returned every letter unopened, had made it abundantly clear that Alara would never be acknowledged as part of the Hawthorne family. I'd tried, in the early years. Sent birth announcements, first birthday photos, updates on milestones. All returned, unopened. Eventually, I'd stopped trying. Why force my daughter on people who didn't want to know her? Why teach her that she needed to beg for scraps of acknowledgement from people who should have loved her unconditionally? The Hawthorne Foundation is proud to announce a new partnership with. Helena stopped mid-sentence. Her hand went to her throat. The champagne flute slipped from her other hand. Crystal shattered against marble. The sound cut through polite applause like a gunshot, sharp and startling in the hushed ballroom. Helena Hawthorne collapsed. For a split second, the entire ballroom froze. 500 people, collectively holding their breath, brains struggling to process what they were seeing. Then chaos erupted. Security rushed forward. Guests gasped and scattered, some moving toward the stage, others backing away. Victor lunged from his seat, his face white with terror, his polished composure completely shattered. And Alara stood up. I watched my daughter move through the crowd with the calm authority of someone who'd spent years in trauma bays, who'd held lives in her hands and refused to let them slip away. She didn't run. She didn't panic. She simply moved, and the crowd parted for her like water, responding instinctively to the confidence in her bearing, the purpose in her stride. Everyone stepped back, her voice rang out, clear and commanding. Give her space. You, call 911, tell them possible anaphylaxis, female, 72, unconscious, possible airway compromise. You, I need the house EpiPen kit, now. Building this size should have emergency medical supplies. Find them. I stood frozen, watching my daughter, the child Helena had erased, the granddaughter deemed unworthy of the Hawthorne name, fight to save the woman who denied her existence. The irony was so sharp it could draw blood, so perfect it felt almost scripted. Helena's lips were turning blue. Her breathing came in terrible, wheezing gasps, the sound rattling and desperate. Alara dropped to her knees beside her grandmother, hands moving with practiced precision, checking airway, pulse, responsiveness. Airways compromised, Alara said, her voice steady, clinical. Respiratory distress, facial swelling, urticaria developing on neck and chest. Likely anaphylactic reaction. Time is critical. A young man in hotel uniform rushed forward with a red medical kit. Alara opened it swiftly, her movements economical, efficient, each action purposeful and exact. Victor, she said without looking up. When did she eat last? What did she have? Victor stared at his daughter as if seeing her for the first time. Really seeing her, not as an abstract concept or a source of guilt, but as a living, breathing, capable human being. I don't know. The reception. There was seafood. Shrimp cocktail, I think. Maybe lobster. She allergic to shellfish? I'm not sure. Alara's jaw tightened, but she didn't comment on the fact that her father didn't know his own mother's medical history, didn't know something so basic and potentially life-threatening. She was too busy saving a life. Too professional to let personal feelings interfere with medical necessity. "Mom," Elara called out, still not looking up from her patient. "My medical bag, in the coat check. Stall 47. Run." I ran. My heels clicked against marble as I navigated through confused guests and overwhelmed staff. Women in evening gowns pressed themselves against walls to let me pass. Men in tuxedos stared. Security looked uncertain whether to stop me or help. I ignored all of it, focused only on getting what my daughter needed. The coat check attendant's eyes went wide when I arrived breathless, demanding stall 47. "Ma'am, my daughter is saving someone's life. Stall 47. Now." He moved. 30 seconds later, I was running back with a black medical bag clutched in my hands, the leather warm against my palms, heavy with the instruments and medications my daughter always carried, always prepared for emergencies even at formal events. By the time I returned, Elara had already administered epinephrine from the hotel kit. Helena's color was beginning to return, her breathing less labored but still distressed, still concerning. The ambulance crew was rushing through the ballroom entrance, their equipment rattling, boots loud against the marble. Elara looked up as I arrived, took the bag without breaking her assessment of Helena's vitals, her fingers on her grandmother's pulse, counting, monitoring, evaluating every change. "Vitals stabilizing," she told the paramedics as they reached her, her voice crisp and professional. "Administered 0.3 milligrams epinephrine intramuscular approximately 90 seconds ago. Initial presentation was severe respiratory distress, facial and throat swelling, urticaria, altered consciousness. Reaction appears to be moderating but she needs hospital monitoring. Possible biphasic response within the next several hours. I'd recommend ICU observation for a minimum of 12 hours. The lead paramedic, a woman with kind eyes and efficient hands, nodded with respect. "You're a doctor. Trauma surgeon. County General. Dr. Elara Cruz. Thank God you were here, doctor." The paramedics worked around my daughter, but they deferred to her expertise, following her lead, asking her questions, treating her as a colleague rather than a bystander. I watched them prepare Helena for transport, watched Victor hover uselessly at the edges, watched security try to manage the crowd of shocked guests who'd come for a gala and gotten a medical emergency instead. And I watched my daughter, the child I'd raised alone, the brilliant woman who'd become everything despite being denied her birthright, save the life of the woman who tried to erase her. The irony was so sharp it could draw blood. So perfect it felt like the universe delivering justice in its own particular way. Quick pause, if you're enjoying this story, please subscribe. It takes weeks to write stories like this, and your support helps me keep creating them for you. Thank you for being here. At the hospital, I sat in a waiting room that smelled of antiseptic and fear. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in a flat, colorless glow that made everyone look slightly sick, slightly wrong. Victor paced. Back and forth, his expensive shoes squeaking slightly against linoleum, his phone pressed to his ear as he spoke to someone about Helena's condition, about medical privacy, about controlling the narrative. Always controlling something. Always managing the image, the story, the way things would be perceived by the public and the board and the society pages. We didn't speak. There was nothing left to say that hadn't already been said by our silence, our choices, our separate lives. 23 years of decisions made and paths taken. 23 years of him choosing the easy road and me choosing the hard but honest one. Other Hawthorne family members filtered in. Victor's younger sister, Diane, whom I'd once considered a friend. His uncle, Martin, who'd always been kind to me. Various executives and board members, all looking appropriately concerned, all checking their phones, all maintaining the careful facade that wealth and power demanded. None of them acknowledged me. To them, I remained invisible, inconvenient, a reminder of Victor's youthful indiscretion that they'd all agreed to pretend had never happened. Elara emerged 3 hours later, still in her evening gown but with a white coat over it now, her name embroidered on the breast pocket. Dr. Ilara Cruz, Trauma Surgery. She looked exhausted but composed, her hair pulled back now, her face free of makeup she'd washed away to maintain sterility. "She's stable," Ilara said, and Victor sagged with relief. "Severe anaphylactic reaction, shellfish based on blood work and what they found in her system. We got to her in time. Another 3 to 5 minutes and we would have lost her to complete airway closure. She's lucky. Very lucky." Victor moved toward Ilara as if to embrace her, then stopped, uncertain. "My daughter had that effect on him. The result of 23 years of absence, of being a stranger to his own child." "Thank you," he said, his voice breaking. "Ilara, thank you. I'm a doctor," she replied simply. "It's what I do." The words carried weight neither of them acknowledged. "It's what I do. Not because you're my father. Not because she's my grandmother. Not because I owe you anything or want your recognition. Because it's what I do. Because I took an oath to save lives regardless of personal history or family drama." "She's asking for you," Ilara said, but she was looking at me, not Victor. "For Mom." Victor's head snapped toward me, surprise flickering across his face, confusion evident in the way his eyebrows drew together. "For Marielle?" he asked, as if he couldn't quite believe it. "Yes," Ilara said. "She specifically asked for my mother. She was quite insistent about it, actually." I stood slowly, smoothing my dress, aware that every eye in that waiting room was on me. Victor, Ilara, a handful of Hawthorne executives who'd followed the ambulance, Diane staring with barely concealed shock, Martin looking thoughtful and perhaps slightly approving. "Room 432, Ilara said quietly. "I'll walk you there." We moved through sterile corridors in silence, our footsteps echoing against linoleum. The hospital at night had a particular quality, hushed and urgent simultaneously, with distant beeping and the soft rush of ventilation systems and the occasional code being called over intercoms. At the door, Ilara touched my arm. "You don't have to go in if you don't want to." "I know," I said. "But I think I need to." "Want me to come with you?" I considered it, then shook my head. "Some conversations need to happen alone." Ilara nodded and stepped back. I pushed open the door. Helena Hawthorne lay small and fragile against white sheets, 4 lines running into her arm, monitors beeping steadily beside her bed. Without her designer gown and diamonds, without her aristocratic bearing and cold certainty, she looked like what she was. An old woman who'd nearly died. Vulnerable, mortal, stripped of all pretense. Marielle. Her voice was weak, stripped of its usual command. "You came. You asked." I moved closer but didn't sit. Didn't make myself comfortable. This wasn't a social call, wasn't forgiveness freely given. I was here out of basic human decency, nothing more. "Thank you," Helena said, her eyes filling with tears. "For raising her. For making her extraordinary." I looked at this woman who'd called me unsuitable. Who'd pressured her son to choose between me and his inheritance, between love and legacy. Who'd erased my daughter from the family tree like an embarrassing mistake, like a problem that could be solved by simply pretending it didn't exist. "I didn't raise her for you," I said quietly. "I raised her for herself." Helena's tears spilled over, tracking down her pale cheeks, leaving trails that smudged what remained of her makeup. "I know. I know that now. Marielle, I was wrong. About you. About everything. About what matters and what doesn't. I spent 23 years defending a legacy, protecting a name, and tonight I nearly died. And the person who saved me was the grandchild I refused to acknowledge. The irony isn't lost on me." "Yes," I agreed, my voice even. "You were wrong. There was no satisfaction in it. No triumph. Just the plain truth, spoken clearly in a hospital room that smelled of second chances and consequences. Helena struggled to sit up slightly, wincing from the floor and the monitors and the residual effects of anaphylaxis. I want to make it right. I want to fund a fellowship. In her name. A national trauma surgery program. Let me. Ask Elara, I interrupted gently but firmly. She makes her own decisions. She always has. But. She's not a child, Helena. She's not a pawn in your redemption story. If you want to do something for her, you ask her. You respect her autonomy. You let her decide what serves her vision, not your guilt. Helena stared at me, and I saw recognition dawn in her eyes. Recognition of the woman I'd become, the mother I'd been, the strength she'd underestimated for 23 years. You raised her well, Helena whispered. I raised her true, I corrected. There's a difference. I raised her to know her worth doesn't come from anyone's approval or acknowledgement. I raised her to build her own life, on her own terms, with her own values. I raised her to be whole, regardless of who chose to recognize her existence. I turned to leave, and Helena's voice stopped me at the door. Marielle. I'm sorry. For all of it. For calling you unsuitable. For pressuring Victor. For denying Elara. For 23 years of pretending she didn't exist. I'm sorry. I looked back at her, this woman who'd wielded her power like a weapon and now lay broken by her own choices, humbled by mortality and consequence. I believe you, I said. But sorry doesn't undo 23 years. It doesn't erase the birthday parties she attended alone, with just me and whatever friends I could gather. The graduations without grandparents. The questions about why her father's family pretended she didn't exist. The moments she needed extended family and had none. Sorry doesn't fix that. I know. Good, I said softly. Because understanding that is where your real work begins. Not in grand gestures or fellowship programs. In accepting that some damage is permanent, and the best you can do is stop causing more. I left before she could respond, before the tears in her eyes could become words that might sound like excuses or justifications. Elara waited for me by the elevators, still in her surgical scrubs now, the evening gown discarded somewhere in a staff locker, traded for the practical uniform of her real life. How'd it go? She asked. She apologized. And I told her the truth. That she was wrong. That sorry doesn't undo the past. That if she wants to do something, she needs to ask you directly and respect whatever decision you make. Elara studied my face, my brilliant girl, my greatest achievement, reading me the way she'd learned to read people through years of observation and conversation. You okay, Mom? I'm always okay, I said, and meant it. Because I built a life that doesn't need their validation to be real. The elevator arrived. We stepped inside, and as the doors closed, Elara leaned against me, her head on my shoulder in a gesture of affection she'd been doing since childhood. She wants to give me something. A fellowship program. Funding for trauma surgery training. I know. I told her to ask you directly. What do you think I should do? I looked at my daughter's reflection in the polished elevator doors. Strong, capable, kind. Everything I'd hoped she'd become and more. A woman who saved lives and didn't need anyone's permission to be brilliant. If you've stayed with me this far, you're already one of us. Subscribe now so you don't miss what happens next, because stories like this deserve to be heard all the way through. I think, I said carefully, that you should decide what serves your vision. Not her guilt. Not his regret. Not my vindication. Yours. What do you want to build? What impact do you want to have? If her money serves that vision without compromising your autonomy, then consider it. If it comes with strings or expectations, walk away. Elara nodded slowly. Will you be there? When I tell them my decision. If you want me to be. I always want you to be, Mom. That's the whole point. You're the one who showed up. You're the one who stayed. You're the one whose opinion actually matters. We rode the rest of the way in comfortable silence, and when we reached the lobby, Victor was waiting. He stood as we approached, his expression uncertain, hopeful, desperate in ways that would have moved me once but now just made me tired. Marielle, can we talk? Please. I glanced at Alara, who squeezed my hand and stepped away. I'll be in the car, Mom. Victor and I stood in that hospital lobby, under fluorescent lights that made everything look slightly unreal, and I waited for him to speak. I'd learned long ago that silence was sometimes the most powerful response. I don't know where to start, he said finally. Then don't. Marielle, Victor, it's been 23 years. Whatever you want to say now, it's 23 years too late. I know. God, I know that. But watching her tonight, watching our daughter save my mother's life. Marielle, she's incredible. She's brilliant and capable and everything I could have hoped for in a child. And I had nothing to do with it. I missed everything. Her first steps, her first words, school plays, graduations, all of it. I missed watching her become this extraordinary person. Yes, I agreed. She is. You did that. You made her that. We did that, I corrected quietly. She made herself that. I just gave her the space and support to become who she was always meant to be. I didn't try to mold her into something she wasn't. I didn't pressure her to fit a particular image or meet certain expectations. I let her explore, discover, become. Victor's face crumpled slightly, the careful control slipping to show real emotion underneath. I should have been there. Yes, I said simply. You should have. Can I? Is there any way to? I want to try again, Marielle. I want. No. The word hung between us, final and complete. Just. No. That's it. Just no, I confirmed. Victor, you didn't lose me because you failed once. You lost me because you didn't fight. You chose your mother's approval over our family. You chose legacy over love. You chose the path of least resistance, the path that kept your inheritance intact and your mother happy. Those were your choices, and you have to live with them. I did. I was young. I was stupid. You were a grown man who made a decision, I said, not unkindly. You were 27 years old, Victor. Old enough to have built a company. Old enough to sit on boards and make million-dollar decisions. Old enough to know the difference between right and wrong. And you chose wrong. And I'm a grown woman who made mine. I chose to leave. I chose to raise our daughter alone. I chose to build a life that didn't need you. And I don't regret any of it. So that's it. We coexist. We co-parent, I said. Respectfully. Professionally. When it benefits Alara. But there's no going back, Victor. There's no romance, no nostalgia, no second chance at what we were. That door closed 23 years ago, and I'm not interested in reopening it. What about what we could be? I looked at this man I'd once loved with everything I had, and felt nothing but distant compassion. The passion was gone. The hurt was gone. Even the anger had faded to nothing. He was just a man who'd made choices that led him away from me, and I was a woman who'd built something beautiful from the rubble. I'm interested in the life I built, I said. Not the one I left behind. I'm interested in my work, my daughter, my friends, my studio, my reputation. I'm interested in the art I restore and the pieces I create. I'm interested in the life I have, not the life I might have had if you'd been brave enough to choose us. Marielle. Victor, I wish you well. Genuinely. I hope you find happiness and peace. I hope you build a relationship with Alara if she's willing. I hope you learn from this and make better choices going forward. But I'm not part of that equation. I moved on a long time ago. I walked away then, walked out of that hospital and into the cool night air where Alara waited in my car, scrolling through her phone. "Everything okay?" she asked as I slid into the driver's seat. "Everything's perfect," I said, and started the engine. 3 weeks later, I sat in a modest breakfast cafe, the kind with mismatched chairs and coffee served in thick ceramic mugs. The kind of place where the food was good and honest and the staff knew regulars by name. Alara sat across from me, a folder open in front of her, papers spread across the scarred wooden table. Victor and Helena sat at the far end of the table, both of them looking smaller somehow, humbled by the force of the woman we'd raised. Helena had recovered fully from the anaphylaxis, though she moved more carefully now, aware of her mortality in ways she hadn't been before. She'd had her medical alert bracelet updated, carried an EpiPen, had long conversations with her doctors about risk factors and prevention. And she'd reached out to Alara, humbly, carefully, asking for a meeting to discuss the fellowship proposal. Not demanding. Not assuming. Asking. "I've reviewed your proposal for the fellowship," Alara said, her voice professional and clear. "And I'm willing to accept funding under the following conditions." Helena leaned forward, eager, desperate to make amends through money, through programs, through anything that might ease the weight of 23 years of denial. "First," Alara continued, "the program will be called the Independent Medical Fellowship for Trauma Surgery. No Hawthorne name anywhere in the literature, the building, or the promotional materials. This is not about legacy or family pride. This is about training the next generation of trauma surgeons without the burden of expectation that comes with inherited names." Victor started to protest, his mouth opening, his hand raising slightly, but Helena touched his arm, silencing him with a gesture. "Second, I will have complete autonomy over hiring, curriculum, and program direction. This is not a Hawthorne Foundation initiative. This is my vision, funded by you. I make all decisions regarding who teaches, what we teach, and how we structure the program. No board approval required. No foundation oversight. My program, my rules." "Of course," Helena said quickly. "Whatever you need. Third, my mother will serve on the advisory board. Her voice carries equal weight to yours in any discussions about program direction or expansion. She may not have a medical degree, but she has wisdom and perspective that I value. And she's the only person whose opinion has mattered for my entire life. If this program is going to bear my values, she needs to be part of it. This channel is for people who believe in dignity, self-worth, and choosing yourself. If that's you, hit subscribe now, you belong here." All eyes turned to me. I hadn't known this was coming, hadn't been consulted, but I kept my expression neutral, giving nothing away. "If you'll have me," I said to Alara. "Always," my daughter replied, her voice soft with affection. The terms were set. Papers were signed. Helena would fund it. Alara would run it. The Hawthorne name would appear nowhere except on the bank transfer, a footnote in the accounting, invisible to anyone who didn't look at the financial records. It was perfect. A kind of justice that money could buy but couldn't control. Afterward, outside the cafe where spring sunshine made everything seem possible and new, where people walked past with coffee and pastries and the ordinary concerns of their ordinary lives, Victor tried one last time. "Marielle, I know you said no. But I need you to know. I regret it. All of it. Every day. Every single day I think about what I lost, what I could have had if I'd been braver. If I'd fought harder. I believe you," I said. "But regret doesn't change anything. It could. If you let it. If we." "Victor," I said gently, "you're asking for something I don't have to give. I'm not angry anymore. I'm not hurt. I'm just Done. I built a beautiful life without you. A complete life. A life I'm proud of. And I'm not interested in dismantling it to make room for what-ifs and maybe somedays and second chances that require me to forget 23 years of your absence. So we're really just this? Co-parenting an adult daughter who doesn't need us anymore. We're showing up respectfully for the woman we both love, I said. That's more than enough. That's everything, actually. Be grateful you get that much. I left him standing there in the sunshine, walked to my car where my own work waited, drove back to my studio where restoration projects filled my days and my own commissions lined the walls and clients sought my expertise. That evening, as I worked on restoring a 19th-century landscape, carefully removing centuries of grime to reveal the vibrant colors underneath, my phone rang. Ilara. I signed the final papers, she said. The fellowship is official. How do you feel? Good. Proud. Like I'm doing this on my terms, like you taught me. Like I'm building something that matters without compromising who I am. You are. Mom. Yes, baby. Thank you. For everything. For raising me to know my own worth. For teaching me that I don't need anyone's approval to be extraordinary. For showing me that sometimes the greatest strength is walking away from what doesn't serve you. I set down my brush, my vision blurring slightly with tears I hadn't expected, emotion catching me off guard in the quiet of my studio. You don't need to thank me for that. It's who you've always been. I just made sure nobody convinced you otherwise. I know, she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. But it's who I am because you showed me how. You walked away from everything, and you built something better. You taught me that second chances aren't about going back. They're about going forward. They're about creating new possibilities instead of trying to resurrect dead ones. After we hung up, I stood in my studio, surrounded by the evidence of the life I'd built. Restored art that bore my signature. Commissions from clients who sought me out specifically, who trusted my eye and my skill. A daughter who changed lives and didn't need anyone's permission to be brilliant. If you've ever had to choose yourself over what others expected, if you've ever walked away from a life that looked perfect but felt like a cage, if you've ever rebuilt from nothing and created something extraordinary, share this story. Because your journey matters. Your strength matters. And sometimes the greatest love story isn't about finding someone else. It's about finding yourself and refusing to settle for less. Subscribe to Mr. Stephen's Stories for more tales about dignity, boundaries, and the courage to walk forward instead of back. Hit that like button if this story resonated with you. Drop a comment sharing your own moment of choosing yourself. Because we're building a community here, a place where strength isn't about loudness or revenge, it's about quiet certainty and unshakable self-worth. 6 months after the fellowship launched, I attended the opening ceremony. Not in a ballroom this time, but in a converted community center where Ilara had chosen to base the program. Accessible, practical, focused on service rather than status. The building wasn't grand, but it was functional, well-equipped, located in a neighborhood that actually needed the services the program would eventually provide. Helena was there, moving slowly but with new purpose. She'd stepped back from most Hawthorne Foundation boards, focusing instead on direct service work. Volunteering at free clinics. Funding scholarships with no naming rights attached. Learning, finally, that legacy wasn't about having your name on buildings. It was about the lives you touched and the doors you opened for others. Victor was there too, sitting in the back row, watching his daughter with a mixture of pride and regret that would probably never fully fade. He'd learned to show up without trying to control. To offer support without demanding recognition. It wasn't redemption, exactly. But it was growth. Small, painful, necessary growth. And I was there, sitting beside my daughter as she gave the keynote address, talking about the importance of accessible healthcare and the responsibility of those with resources to lift others up, to create pathways for people who might not have traditional advantages. Afterward, the four of us stood together awkwardly near the refreshment table, paper cups of coffee and cookies arranged on folding tables, a far cry from the crystal and champagne of the gala. "Congratulations, Ilara," Helena said softly. It's wonderful. You're wonderful. What you're building here matters." "Thank you, Helena," Ilara said, using her grandmother's first name with intentional distance, a reminder that titles had to be earned, not assumed. I hope over time, you might. That we could. We can have a respectful relationship," Ilara said clearly. "I can appreciate your support of this program. But we're not going to be the grandmother-granddaughter you imagine. Too much time has passed. Too many choices were made. Too many years where I didn't exist to you." Helena's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded, accepting the boundary without argument. "I understand. Thank you for your honesty." Later, as we prepared to leave, Victor approached me one more time, his persistence both admirable and exhausting. "She's extraordinary, Marielle. What you built together." "What she built herself," I corrected. "I just made sure she had the foundation. The rest was all her. I wish I could go back. Make different choices. Fight harder. But you can't," I said simply. "None of us can. We can only go forward. Make better choices from here. Be better people from this point on." "Are you happy?" he asked suddenly, genuinely curious. "In the life you built?" I looked at him, really looked at him, and realized I felt nothing but gentle pity for the man who'd let fear dictate his choices, who traded love for approval and spent 2 decades regretting it. "I'm more than happy," I said. "I'm free. I'm whole. I built something that belongs entirely to me, that reflects my values, that required no compromise of who I am. So yes, Victor. I'm happy. Deeply, profoundly happy in ways I never could have been if I'd stayed." I walked to my car where Ilara waited, and as we drove away from the ceremony, she reached over and squeezed my hand. "You know what the best part of today was?" she asked. "What?" "Watching you stand there, completely comfortable in your own skin, with nothing to prove to anyone. That's the woman who raised me. That's the strength I want to carry forward. That's the example I want to set. Some second chances aren't about going back. They're about going forward, without losing yourself." I learned that lesson in a small apartment above an art studio, raising a daughter alone, building a life that required nothing from the past. And looking at everything I'd created, my work, my daughter, my uncompromising self, I wouldn't change a single choice. Not even the one that brought me to that gala, to watch the life I'd left behind finally understand what it had lost. Because what they lost, I gained. And what I gained was worth infinitely more than what they could ever offer. My name is Marielle Cruz. Not Hawthorne. Never Hawthorne. And that distinction made all the difference.